welcome to this session. Thank you for being here. You could be anywhere else in the world. You could be at the Piranha Pool right now. I'd rather be at Piranha Pool, to be completely honest with you. That's our bread and butter. For those who know Tech.mn, we're supporting startups, documenting, chronicling what's happening here in the tech scene, and that's the stuff that floats our boat. So rather than hear myself talk, I'd rather be at Piranha Pool. Maybe some of y'all were torn, but we thank you for being with us here today. We are filming Piranha Pool. We'll have that posted very shortly after. Well before the mini-star group will get it up, I can say. But nonetheless, we're here to talk about the state of tech in Minnesota, state of startups in particular. That's what we're really concerned with at Tech.mn. I'll introduce myself. I'm Jeff Pesic.
Hey, what's up? I'm Patrick Meenan. I'm a partner with Arthur Ventures, venture capital firm in Minneapolis and Fargo, investing out of our current fund, which is about $45 million. So we're investing in companies at the seed and Series A stage, anywhere outside of Silicon Valley with a focus on B2B software.
Ryan Brocher with Matchstick Ventures, early stage VC based here in the Twin Cities. We invest in seed stage tech startups, previously known as Confluence Capital, but recently rebranded to Matchstick Ventures.
Hi, I'm Darren Cotter. I'm the founder and CEO of Inbox Dollar, so I'm an entrepreneur at heart and also an active angel investor, invested in several companies here locally in the Twin Cities. Happy to be here.
Hey, I'm Mike, co-founded Tech.mn with Jeff here, and run a company called Livefront. We design and build mobile apps.
Everybody has to say something as we pass it back.
I wish I was at Piranha Pool.
The Wild playoffs start soon for the hockey fans here. Woo!
I have two companies presenting at Piranha Pool right now, so I'm hoping to hear loud applause coming from that corner, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I'm just glad to be sitting next to someone who was termed a fairy VC in the Minneapolis North session, Mr. Ryan Brocher.
Were they speaking about you? Or was it more in general, I thought, all these fairy VCs? So yeah, the cool thing about, obviously, like Minibar, the format here is like it's open, it's decentralized. We can host this space and have a dialogue that is inclusive from those who we consider to be stakeholders, I guess, in the tech industry, those who care about startups and want more, want to see prosperity. I think just as a starting point, it's always good to get a pulse. Raise your hand if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a practicing technology entrepreneur. If you could stand up, actually, as well. Let's just stand up if you're a tech entrepreneur. First thing we want to do is recognize and acknowledge the entrepreneurs in the audience and y'all who are making it happen and who are doing it. So a round of applause for you. It's like, it feels a little weird, doesn't it? Like, you have some kind of awkward smiles on your face. Nobody does that, do they? This is a place that, for better or worse, doesn't respect entrepreneurs as much as they could. And I say this place, I mean the state of Minnesota. And so, it's 5 years ago when Mike and I began Tech.mn, we sought to change that from the media vector, that point of view, and look at what the role the media plays, awareness and visibility, and the narrative plays around talking about entrepreneurship, promoting entrepreneurs, and getting the word out there. And so hats off to you. Without us, we would not exist. We would be nothing. And we really appreciate what it is that you do, the risk and the sacrifice that you take. So that's the first thing I'd like to start with. And I wish that, in the future, we see more respect, more recognition from media across the state, from people in the state of Minnesota, for entrepreneurs. That's the first thing that I would like to just put out there, because it's very personal to me. It's the bias that we have with Tech.mn and the media space that we operate in, for those who know us. When you think about it, entrepreneurs in the hierarchy of attention in the state, entertainers, athletes, politicians, criminals, they all get more attention and more resources than entrepreneurs. Think about that objectively when you look at the media landscape. Where are the resources being allocated? And entrepreneurs are less than all of those. What does that tell you? So that's something just to start with. And so appreciation and props to those who are doing it, that we're standing up there. I hope we can see more of that. And if we can do that, I think we'll be at a better place in the future with regards to those who want to become entrepreneurs, who are thinking about it, who are younger or emerging or aspiring, what it means to be an entrepreneur and the amount of respect you can get in this marketplace. So raise your hand if you don't know Tech.mn, otherwise we can just fast forward. Cool. Do we have any other slides up there we want to throw on? And we can throw the mic around. We want to hear from the audience in this too, more than anything really. But the reason that we selected the people that you see on stage today, and Rob Weber, who was invited, unfortunately couldn't join us. He had a business meeting he had to attend to at the last minute. But Rob Weber is leading a multi-million-dollar company, and he's also doing a lot of angel investing. Patrick and Ryan had proposed this kind of a similar session, and we said, hey guys, very aligned philosophies. You're respected investors in the space. Let's join forces on that. And Darren is running a company. You're based out of Eagan, Mendota Heights now? Okay, multi-million-dollar company as well, and you're one of the most active angel investors, emerging angel investors right now in the Twin Cities. I was looking at what I know about your portfolio, and you're reinvesting. And so I think it's very relevant to have somebody on stage who's, yes. It's very relevant to have somebody on stage who's not only leading a technology company in the state of Minnesota, but is also putting the money where the mouth is and is actually putting their dollars back into it to support startups. And I guess just maybe as a starting point, I'm always curious to hear, I asked Rob Weber the other day for those who caught our Candor interview, but for you, Darren, what is it, why do you actually do angel investing?
Great question. Well, there's a financial element, right? So I'm not only doing angel investing for charity. So I'm certainly over the long run looking to get a return on the capital that I'm putting to work in small private companies. But there is a big element for me that's giving back to the next generation of entrepreneurs. I happen to take the path of bootstrapping and not raising capital, but also recognize that that's not the best path for all entrepreneurs. And it can be challenging for entrepreneurs who are at that critical stage, right? So maybe they've built a product and they've gotten some traction, they found some customers, but really scaling and taking that next big leap, that's a really challenging step to take. And capital, whether it's $250,000 or $500,000, can be a really important element in that. You phrased it well, right? Putting money where my mouth is. I want to be part of that, and I want to see the many hundreds of companies in Minnesota today that are sitting at that critical juncture, the ones who just need that little bit of capital to take the next step and succeed. I want to be part of that.
Did you have angel investors?
I did not, no. So we've been through the capital raise process a couple of times. I'm familiar with it on both sides of the table, but we've ultimately decided to not take outside capital at this point.
But so none at all whatsoever?
No outside capital,
Wow.
right?
And where are you guys at right now in terms of employees and revenue, just roughly?
Yeah, we're about 45 employees. We grew a lot last year. We're really making a significant investment in mobile, which a lot of companies I'm sure are doing, but for us it's really business changing. We're primarily a desktop business making this gigantic transformation. We're about $25 million in revenue.
Wow. When did you start it there?
In 2000, so a long time now, but really scaling as an enterprise or growth company for about the last 10 years.
Fantastic. And just a note, we don't have it listed up here, but you could tweet us or you could text us. Mike, if you want to throw the number up there. We're collecting comments, questions as we go along here. For those who don't want to raise their hand, don't feel comfortable standing up and putting it out there. You can throw a tweet at us or a text, and anonymously more. So I guess.
If I could add one thing to what you were saying earlier, Jeff. I'm reminded of a quote. It's not my quote. I wish it was. It's a pretty good one. Many companies in Silicon Valley loudly make no money compared to many companies in Minnesota, or maybe even expand that to the Midwest, quietly make lots of money. And I think that's a testament to the fact that we do have successes here. They are happening. We're just not as good at promoting and highlighting those successes, which is something I think that was talked about at length in one of the first sessions today. But it's worth emphasizing and saying again, we need to highlight the successes that are happening here and build on that momentum.
But that's just not as exciting as the celebrities and the sports players. It's not, right? I mean, you kind of appeal to the lowest common denominator, and that's what you get. But it's true. Maybe it's more of in our DNA, our humility here in Minnesota to not really talk so much about what we're doing. But it's just good to have you guys here as well, because you are investing outside of Minnesota. You're traveling outside of Minnesota. Talk a little bit about some of the nuances just you might be seeing in between the different markets that you're familiar with.
Sure. Yeah, so we're based in the Twin Cities. We also invest really across the board. We've got investments in Chicago, Boulder, Denver, St. Louis, Lincoln, Nebraska, Seattle. So we see a lot of different markets, and you get into them. And it's interesting because you start to see a lot of trends. across them, and you start to see, yeah, they've got different nuances more culturally than anything, and some of them have their own little shtick, where one area is all about data, one area is all about, even like food tech or health tech, et cetera, and you have these nice little clusters. What I think when I compare the Twin Cities across, and I'm not a huge fan of like just comparing markets because they're all individual, and I think you should be focusing on what you do well. But what you start to find is they become these clusters of areas where people are drawn to from that where they want to start their company. And you can start your company in any basement in anywhere in the world, especially in tech. But is that what you really want to do? It's a really lonely game to go, and you don't have the resources. And how do you, once you grow, where do you go? So you start to see these areas become like the quote unquote capitals of their area for startups, where that's where you want to go. And we try and target those areas because they're really obviously hotbeds for that next generation. And where I see Minnesota, I think we definitely have that. When I moved back from Boulder, Denver, you could see they were drawn into that area. And when I came here, you see a lot of people drawn into this area who are from outstate Minnesota, from the Dakotas, from Wisconsin. I'm from Iowa, and I live up here now. And you start to see that cluster, but it's not really recognized on a national level, like you were saying. It's just more humble. And in other markets, if you said, "Hey, who's a tech VC?" some people would stand on the chair, and let people know, and give the elevator pitch, knowing that Patrick and I are up here. And I'm not saying that is, and I think that's not the best way to approach it either. It's actually really refreshing to be when we come home and be in this market, because you actually get to talk to the entrepreneurs, and they actually are doing the work versus having an idea. They've already been working on it. So.
Yeah, I think it's a little similar. And for context, I think we've made 14 investments out of our current fund, 4 in Minneapolis, 2 in Madison, 2 Seattle, Phoenix, Chicago, Detroit, New York, Pittsburgh, Philly. So kind of a broad swath of communities. And outside of Seattle, Boulder, and Austin, which I think are kind of clearly on that next level of cities that a lot of places like Minneapolis try to aspire to, my biggest learning is that the grass is always greener, right? So I travel to Madison or Cincinnati or Kansas City, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, you guys in Minneapolis have it figured out. You guys have so many great companies, and God, you have all this stuff that, you have all these Fortune 500 companies." Then people here are like, "Well, we don't have an accelerator, but you have an accelerator, so you're better." And I think that my biggest learning is I honestly think that of that next tier of cities, which again I would say, off the top of my head, the Cincinnati, Madison, Kansas City, Omaha, I don't know, there's more, Des Moines, whatever. I really do feel like Minneapolis is right at the top of that tier and has the best potential of breaking through to that next level that I think we aspire to, which is the Boulder, Austins, Seattles of the world.
As an expansion of that, one of the things that I've seen and that I've learned and that I always come back to is all of these communities that you see when you go traveling around. They are, and including Minneapolis, I think successful startup communities are led by entrepreneurs. It's the Darren Cotters of the world that are entrepreneurs, that are successful, that reinvest back in, and that's the kind of one of the primary common threads. And I think that's why, as a part of this session, Jeff kicked it off. Let's celebrate the entrepreneurs in the room. Let's hold them up and esteem them. We got a couple questions from the audience. For the panel, and we could actually turn it back around. We want this to be a participatory session, right? So we'd love to hear your guys' thoughts too. Someone wrote in what related to entrepreneurship as an extension of that is the emergence of companies like UHG and Target building in-house incubators helping startups or just leeching talent? Anyone up here want to take a stab at that, or?
I think the question asker should probably answer that question, since they seem to have a pretty strong opinion on it. I would love to hear their answer.
Was it on Twitter, or how did they do it?
Text.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I texted myself.
Yeah, give it a call.
I'm just kidding. It wasn't my question, but someone else.
I just couldn't fit it on Twitter. I don't know what they're doing today, but I think that all those programs, it'll be interesting to see the longevity of them, right? Because usually corporations go in these cycles, right? And I worked at Microsoft. It's the same stuff. It was like Microsoft had an investing arm and an incubator, 8 years ago, spent a ton of money on it, and then new executives come in and they're like, holy shit, how did we pour $100 million into something that didn't produce anything? So then investing in incubators are like a dirty word, right? And then they come back kind of like 4 years later. And so it'll be interesting to see, you know, Target and UHG, any of these companies that are doing it, you know, is this really something that sticks around? I think American Family in Madison is another great example. They poured tons of dough into the local community. It'll be really interesting to see if that sticks. So whether it is a, you know, additive to talent or draining of talent, you know, I think it's kind of more temporary than anything.
Best Buy is an example. They had an incubator-like program for a while.
Personally, I believe that it gives an entrepreneur basically a stepping stone. You know, it gives them a platform to actually test the waters. If you're not sure about yourself, here's a company that's giving you a team and money to actually try and put something together. It's a good place for an entrepreneur to try, you know, and venture into it. I would hope that it would produce people that would spin out, because most of these things, especially in large companies, don't work because companies have a finite vision of where their company is supposed to be. An entrepreneur has like these grand, you know, ideas, and being given that free reign to actually make them explode is what, you know, what we're trying to do. And for a large company, that really isn't going to work. But given that platform to actually start playing around in that area will give a person the ability to go off and do it themselves. So I look at it as a possibility of a great tool to create stronger entrepreneurs.
Yeah, just to agree with what you said, I was actually part of the incubation group at Microsoft that got destroyed. But a team of like 45 to 50 that I was on, I would say within 3 years, about 20 of us had gone on, left kind of big corporations, and had started our own things. I think it was a good launching point, and exactly what you said, it kind of was a halfway point for a lot of people.
So maybe that needs to be part of the success judgment or criteria, right? It doesn't have to be successful at the corporate entity and make Best Buy, for example, grow X%, but if it inspires 50 entrepreneurs to go start something 2, 3, 4 years later, that's success.
I think from the startup community perspective too, it's a great door that is open, because if you're a startup and you're trying to, if I could just land Best Buy as a customer or Target, you hear that all day long, but who do you call at Best Buy to even get in? There's not like a number. You can just call and be like, hey, do you want to use my stuff? So those accelerators are nice, and I think just from a selfishly on the startup side of it, they're almost used as, or I hope they're used as basically outsourced R&D for the company, where they know that they may not be able to innovate internally as well as an entrepreneur can externally, and allow them to do that within the confines of them. And then, you know, who knows, become a customer, acquire the company. I think it's a good thing on the whole, especially for a community like ours that is dominated by corporations that are hard to crack.
Off of that, I was part of a startup that was an incubator at Microsoft, partnered with American Family Insurance. It was like wearable tech and home automation, and that's exactly what they use it for, kind of outsourcing R&D and learning from different people in the industry. So it was really
The military's been using this model for years, where, you know, they'll sell out a portion of a project that they're doing to a bunch of different companies, and, you know, basically giving them money to build the, you know, whatever project they give them specs for. And it's like they're really not expecting much on the return on that money, but a lot of the stuff that we use nowadays is built on these kind of technologies that were inspired by the government. You know, and it's moved on private sector, where you see the large companies actually using that same kind of model, where, you know, we'll invest a small or a chunk of our money, hopefully so that down the road somebody will come up with stuff that we can actually use.
So given the Fortune 500s here and the established class of corporations that we have, how many of these companies have a venture arm or an internal incubator in Minnesota?
I'd have to say at least a quarter of them. Because if they want their company to actually grow, if they want to see actual growth and prosperity of their company, they have to invest in growth.
No, they don't. They're not. Not a quarter of them do. Almost none of them do. I mean, that we're aware of. Can anybody name one?
So I was at Best Buy for 11 years, left in
Venture fund gone.
venture fund gone. They moved their incubator out to Seattle. Like there was innovation within Best Buy, and like great innovation worked because when it was here here at corporate, because we would break down the walls of legacy systems or the processes that need to be blown up, and you need to do that by running around here and finding the people that you need to change the process or change the mentality. But when you move it out to Silicon Valley or Seattle, it's like there's great innovation out there, but when you have to like integrate it back into the mothership, you're an outside entity trying to change what is here.
United Health Group has the garage, right? So they've got stuff going on there in some form or fashion to varying degrees. It's some public, mostly private, whatever. They have that system, they have that mechanism. But I don't think a quarter of them do. And your point was like they have to if they want to innovate. I mean, true, but look what's happening to a lot of these companies. They're disintegrating. They're not innovating, and they're not reaching out to the community. They're not engaging that pipeline, and they're not engaging with startups, are they?
Well, the thing that I'm seeing in
Could you state maybe where you're coming from? Are you an entrepreneur, corporate, investor?
I'm an entrepreneur.
Okay.
Actually, I consider myself, I'm one of these guys where people will come to me and ask me how to get something done. And given enough, or not given enough time, but normally within a couple months, I can give you resources. I'm really good at research. I'm really good at, tracking things down. And it's one of those things that it's my passion of how I work.
Yeah.
Right now, what pays my ability to do this is my web company.
Yeah.
And small startup that we're doing in that realm. But it's one of those things where it's like, one of the things that I've been noticing with a lot of companies is the factor that the reason that they're not investing at the moment in startups or within their own company to try and grow it is the simple fact that they're trying to, for whatever reason, tourniquet something that's not really there.
Okay.
And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, they're not seeing as much money as their competitor, but they're not doing the analysis in-house to actually see what's causing the problems in-house.
Sure. We could move on from the corporate conversation, but can we all agree it's a missed opportunity? Huge missed opportunity here in the cities. I know, it's been talked about at length, and it blows my mind. I just had a conversation with another large company in town, a similar concept, and I don't have an answer for it, but I think that we can all agree it's a missed opportunity. And if the likes of Best Buy and Targets and whomever can do more, but the thing is too, a lot of people, I think they look at the company and say, because you're a big company, you owe this. You have to do this. No, you have to see the business case, right? So I think it's up to the entrepreneurs and those who are inventing and creating to, I think, show them and demonstrate the value that they can deliver as well. But you have to have that openness. I think it requires humility. And a lot of times these big companies, they don't want to be too humble about and admit where they're wrong or what they don't know. Huh?
Isn't something like this happening at General Mills? Like, Tim, what you doing some really innovative stuff there?
Yeah, so there's a couple different pieces that are going on inside General Mills right now. A lot on the tech, some on the tech side, but more so I would say on the food innovation side, saying, okay, with all of the interest in that kind of new food startups coming around, that's one that General Mills is getting more and more plugged into it. It's done in a lot of different ways. It can be through a fund, it can be connecting our internal R&D scientists with the community. It could be what we do with the Minnesota Cup and creating the new division around food. So what we know good well is the food side. So we're saying, okay, how do we take that and jump in and do more in that and be more involved in the community side?
Yeah. It's crazy because we've seen over the last couple of years, we've seen like so many of these public tech companies that have been bought off, sold off, or just died on the vine that hadn't like no connection whatsoever to what was in the pipeline and the products and the entrepreneurs that were emerging. So it's real in terms of the disconnect between the corporate class and the state and the startups and the entrepreneurs is very fathomable. It's very, very real, I think, for all of us who are in it. But
Do you see a structure outside of Minnesota that has worked elsewhere in the country that brings the corporate class and the entrepreneurial class closer together?
I think a simple example is like the Sprint Techstars in Kansas City. Sprint partnered with Techstars and said, we're going to use your blueprint, your systems, and we're going to help power this accelerator. I mean, I can't help but think that they're going to get a ton of great PR and a ton of great ideas and a ton of great talent out of that process. Smart move on their behalf, you know, I would say. Just one example, but I'm sure that there's others and there's many. But, you know, something's got to give there. You know, I mean, the established companies, I think they have to evolve or die. And if they're not going to tap into, if they're not going to connect with the emerging entrepreneurs, you know, that's up to them, I think, to decide. But they don't know that, I think. Go on. Who's next? Matthew Comento had a question from Twitter, something about the Jobs Act as well. Talked about, you know, angels and VCs are picking up here, but also talking about the Jobs Act is key for many startups to get access to capital. Thoughts? Are you in the room, Matt?
Yeah, it's right here. Yeah, so I mean, obviously VCs and angels on board, but you know there are laws against just people going to angels and VCs, right? So the Jobs Act, I think, is key for a lot of people who are in real early stage looking for funding. Do you guys have any thoughts, or how are you kind of trying to bridge that gap?
What aspect of the Jobs Act?
Well, I guess open to like crowdfunding and that kind of stuff. It's a big part of it, but even access to angels that don't meet the traditional VC criteria of angels, right, which is $1 million.
For credit investors?
I'd
Yeah.
like to hear the VC perspective on what the current legislation, and if it's going to be a net win.
Yeah, so I think you're talking to the accredited status of investors. You have to be accredited to invest in certain things. Unless you're a friend and family, you can invest in. That's a very broad definition of if you're friends, yeah, whatever that means. But I'm all for it. I think the more we can get capital involved in startups, the better. And there's this kind of wide-ranging debate about, you know, what does that mean for VCs? What does that mean for angel lists? What does that mean for later stage stuff? And I think it's all going to come through in the end. But the main thing is we're going to get more capital into startup companies that allows them to get their idea off the ground that otherwise, if they didn't have a special connection, they wouldn't be able to. And so from a VC perspective, I'm all for it because that means that there's going to be more companies starting, and that means that we can look at more companies that potentially wouldn't have started. So it really helps, I think, rise the tide on the market. So, yeah.
What's your perception of a crowdfunding company that is looking to raise Series A? Do you look at that negatively if there is, let's say, 100 participants in a seed round and the cap table looks like an absolute mess? I mean, your perspective of, because that's going to emerge, right? That's going to happen.
Yeah. I would say if you're looking at the cap table, I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this, but yeah, I think that is going to be a trend. You're going to start to see a lot more people on the cap table, especially if they're putting in, you know, $500, $5,000, et cetera. I think there's going to be ways to mitigate that around, and especially if you are able to, you know, collectively put those people into a same entity or something that allows them to invest. I mean, there's ways that people are getting around it already. Especially through AngelList and the like, where you can create an entity, they invest in an entity, and the entity invests into the company. Yeah, I don't think it's going to take away from the fact if you're a great company, you're doing great things, you're making revenue and that stuff, that is going to deter it from actually making the investment.
Yeah, I mean, if we can't invest because there's a messy cap table, I mean, we shouldn't be in our business, right? I mean, it's just part of, you just got to deal with it and adapt to it. If it's a great company, you'll figure out a way to make it work. So in general, is it great to have a clean cap table or really helpful investors? Yeah, but I mean, it's not going to preclude you, you know, if you got a great idea, great business.
Are we all familiar with Minvest right now? No? Yes, no? So Minvest is like a local crowdfunding legislation initiative that's happening right now. There's actually a session on it today, I believe. Yep. I've been covering, observing startups for 5 years, and you know, oftentimes the conversation is like, what can the government do to help deregulating in that sense and allowing people like us to invest in each other's startups? We're all adults, and if we can't put $5,000 or $10,000 in our startups, what is it? You know, it's tragic actually. So I think that, you know, to Matt's point, the Jobs Act, wherever that may stand on the federal level, what's happening right now in the state levels, and you're seeing it happen in over a dozen markets, is really promising for all entrepreneurs in all industry. For the ability, and it's not just startups, it's established companies too, so a restaurant can raise money from their customers to fund their expansion, you know, what have you. But the ability for us to peer-to-peer give each other money, invest in each other's companies, the barrier that, that's really unfortunate. And if there were one thing at the top of the list as far as what I think that the government could do from the Jobs Act on down to the state level where our legislators are, is they can lubricate those wheels and make it easier. easier for us to support each other financially with a vested interest. So it's not just about getting a trinket from a Kickstarter, but it's actually about saying like, hey, this is business. If I'm going to give you 10 grand to support your campaign, can I, maybe I can have a point, or whatever it may be, you negotiate. But I think that's huge. The Jobs Act and the crowdfunding thing is huge in terms of the potential impact on the seed level. Huge. Question?
What do you guys think about solar rollovers and like startups that allow you to have 401k tax free?
I know nothing about that.
Allows you to have your 401k interest free, tax free.
I don't know anything about it.
Buy them, shares in C4.
It's this tax advantage maneuver for.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know.
Is it a loan from the 401k or is it actually withdrawn from the 401k? You buy shares from the 401k with the, you have to really get back.
So I got a question for the audience that came in. If we're focusing on what entrepreneurs can do for each other, I think it's so easy to look at the landscape and blame someone else for what could be done better. And these same conversations even happen in some of the top tier cities we just mentioned too, right? You can improve anywhere. We can easily say, oh, well, the corporations should have more incubators, where the investors should invest more, or whatever. How about some stories, quick anecdotes, 20 seconds, I don't want chapter books here, but entrepreneurs who, in the room, who have had another entrepreneur help them, didn't owe it to them, but someone in the community helped them out, and it made a big difference. That's what community is about, right?
My name's Emily Pritchard. I'm with the Socialites. When we started our company, we rolled a social media marketing company out of the St. Thomas, and we cold pitched Two Gingers Whiskey, which we're just starting up. And Kieran Follier basically invested in us. We had no case studies to work with because he said, I love you're an entrepreneur. We're going to build this together. You're going to help me, grow a great community around my brand, and I'm going to help put you on the map. And 11 months into his company, they were acquired by Jim Beam, and it was an awesome, awesome relationship. So my question, it was a great story, and it really fulfilled kind of that entrepreneur's dream, is how can service providers work with some of these tech startups earlier when a lot of the budgets aren't really marketing budgets, they're put towards development? Should we be asking for equity? Should we, how could we better work together when it comes to us wanting to invest back then in?
I like that question, but I want to hear 2 more success stories. That's an awesome one. They didn't owe anything to you, right? But it worked out for both parties involved. That's entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs.
And yeah, and just real quick, one thing. I think this happens at many different levels too. I think that, so 2 companies that we funded with Lead Pages and When I Work have guys in Clay Collins and Chad Halverson that a lot of people reach out to for like, hey, can I get some of your time? I've got this issue, what have you. Those guys go to other entrepreneurs in Minneapolis all the time and get time with them. They're not on the cap table. They're not charging by the hour. They're literally giving before they're getting, having a breakfast and kicking ideas around. So this isn't even just about people with something getting off the ground and success stories, but this happens even with people that you folks in the room might think are really successful. I mean, they're doing this exact same stuff with other people. So anyways, kick it back to.
Yeah, it's really simple. Like when I was first couple months of starting my company, a guy who had a bunch of extra office space let us come in and work out of there for a couple months, make us look a lot bigger than we were.
Yeah. It's awesome.
And that was a big deal.
That's cool. One more.
Perception's important.
Yeah, Red.
Yep, so just a couple months ago, I was trying to figure out which idea I wanted to pursue. So I reached out to another local entrepreneur who had a distillery, and we spent an evening labeling vodka bottles, and he was giving me advice about my startup, which ultimately led me to leave that idea because it wasn't going to work. And he got bottles labeled, I got some good advice. I feel like we both won. Win-win.
Yeah. Can I share one too?
Yeah, for sure, man.
Building on what you said, Patrick, it's not just early stage entrepreneurs. Rob Weber, who is going to be on the panel with us, has provided a lot of insight and support for me when we were growing our staff significantly last year. Recruiting was a big challenge for us. And he connected me with people. He offered advice because that's something that they've gone through and been very successful at over the past few years. So shout out to Rob. I'll thank him in person next time I see him.
Yeah.
Ask a question. Something that I'm hearing and I'm seeing that's very common to all the stories is mentorship. How do we grow that mentorship program with people that are either, a little bit more advanced than us, or a lot of times even hooking up two young entrepreneurs together that have different ideas.
How many of you know the Minnesota Emerging Software Association, MESA? Because that's a great point. That's a great point. Do you know MESA?
Strong minority.
So just a few people. You should know MESA. They have a network of mentors that come from successful software businesses. Not for everyone, but they provide awesome service in mentorship, and they try and solve that problem. That's a great question. It's something we need to be asking ourselves is, how do we do that formally through organizations like MESA? They've been doing a great job for the last couple of years, growing their mentors, growing the startups that they've helped. They've got a lot of great success stories. And how does that happen organically too, among those that are just getting started? And I think it does, but it comes down to every single individual taking ownership for what they can give back, because you all have something you can offer, right?
I got a question. Can you guys comment on this sort of idea of giving before you're getting, and how common is that? Obviously, we just illustrated a number of examples. Are we trying? It's a good thing to promote. Totally agree. Is that in the minority, in your opinion, when you look at the Twin Cities community, as opposed to that next tier, the Boulder, Austin, Seattle, which I know is part of that community. That's part of the success.
Yeah, I think it can improve here for sure. I've been very impressed once you reach out and make an honest effort to anybody. They typically will reciprocate on that in the market. But I think there's room to improve on that. I think there's very much a way we could have much more of an open door policy of knowing that, hey, if you're making an effort and you know how to approach someone in the right way, that they would reciprocate that and be able to help you. I can speak from the Boulder mentality, which is really where that thesis derived around, is the give before you get. It was unbelievable how you could literally cold reach out to the CEO of SendGrid or Foundry Group or Techstars or whatever, and if you made an honest effort and had like a real reason for meeting beyond just the general networking, how often you'd get a response. And sometimes the response was, no, sorry, I'm busy, but here's someone else that may be able to help you with that. And so it's not so much like, what can I get out of this conversation, as much as, hey, I've got a real problem, and I think you're a person who could really help solve that. And if they couldn't solve it, then they would always pass it on to the next person who they think could get you to that level. So I think that can improve here. I think there is a bit of a, hey, who do you think you are, reaching out to me type thing. And I also think on the flip side, there's a lot of just cold reaching out that isn't very purposeful. If you want like real, if you want to reach out to the CEO of Target, you should have like a real reason for reaching out to them, rather than just like, I want to know you. So just think about it on both sides of the table.
Patrick, can you talk a little bit about these words that you expressed recently? Have you come across those? No, really, I think this is really.
Sure. So I think I got some feedback after I put it out there. I wasn't trying to like poke at any service provider. So the actual reason I wrote it was it reminded me of a situation I was in where, we have entrepreneurs come in a lot, and pitch is too formal of a word. We're pretty informal. Just have a conversation about their business, and sometimes it might be something I have no experience in, like a consumer mobile app. And they ask me for guidance on what to do, and I'm kind of like, holy shit, like I'm the last person who should be telling you what to do, right? And then I kind of learn about who else they're talking to in terms of service providers and getting feedback. And I think what it is that when you're starting something and getting it off the ground, have confidence in yourself, because 9 times out of 10, you know your customer better than the service provider or friend or VC that you might be talking to. So I think it's really important to get advice as people are building businesses, but I think context really, really matters. Get advice from someone in your market, get advice from someone who's been at your stage, right? And don't just go talk to someone because you think that, they've worked in a big company, so they're gonna know, who you should hire or anything like that. So it actually tied back to, I'm sorry, your name, the question on service providers. Emily. So I think Emily's question was a great one, which is, how do you interact with startups when you want to help out? What does that relationship look like? And I think that tying this into that, I think a great way to do that is to actually like go in and kind of on this give before you get thing, test something out before it's even like either asking for equity or even asking for payment, to make sure there's even a fit there, right? And I think if there is a fit there, it's going to naturally evolve into something like, yeah, it makes sense to pay for this, or yeah, it makes sense to give you some equity for this. I think a lot of times people kind of start too quick. and try to work on a structure before they actually help out. So anyways, Jeff, I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but that's, you know, what prompted me to do it.
Well, I thought it was really interesting because it points out that the natural inherent insecurities that I think a lot of entrepreneurs have, like a lot of us have when we're doing entrepreneurial things, because it's going in so many ways, it's working against you. But the whole message of having more, whether it was sourced from, you know, service provider, whomever, it doesn't matter. But the whole point of having more confidence, I think, is like, you know, I've interviewed maybe close to hundreds, if not 1,000 entrepreneurs now over the past 5 years. And, you know, the one thing is that, you know, it's just, behooves entrepreneurs to have more confidence. I don't know how to tell them they get that or where they get that from. But I think that one of the things that I see some entrepreneurs lacking, and maybe it's just part of the Minnesota thing, but is confidence in what they're doing and the fact that they are pursuing the entrepreneur endeavor. And that's where it resonated with me. I didn't really care about who was directed it so much as, you know, the message of having more confidence. So the better way to take away that is like, what can we do with each other, peers in the room and other entrepreneurs? And I've seen some of you have been through it already and, you know, made money and lost money and, you know, a lot of, you know, really interesting things. What can we do to inspire and create more confidence in one another? What can we do in Minnesota to lift our confidence up, so that those who are practicing entrepreneurship have it and those who are not yet, you know, they can get it too? I don't have an answer, but I think it's a question worth considering. Go ahead.
Just to that point, you started this session with talking about how successful entrepreneurs in the Midwest especially aren't necessarily good about sharing their process or sharing their experience. I think one of the things that has always given me confidence when I've built a business or whatever has been hearing that other people have failed and the lessons they've learned and that they've continued on to be successful. So sharing our stories, I think, is really important.
I love doing autopsies on failed startups. Seeing these entrepreneurs that talk is another question.
But it's success. It's success too, though, right, Jeff? I mean, I think it's really important to go back and talk to, you know, Matthew Dornquist about what it was like in the early days of Code 42, right? Or talk to Justin about what it was like in the early days of Sport Engine, right? I mean, they're going to be going through, they have gone through a lot of the stuff that other people are going through, right? So I think it's not only stuff that hasn't worked, but also stuff that has worked, and kind of going back to how vulnerable people were when they started that, right? Because there's always this, you know, expectation that, oh, these people totally had it figured out, you know, things seem so efficient there. Trust me, things are a disaster, like, all the time. Like, even, you know, you're 100 people, 500 people, like, you know, it never gets easier, right, at any given time.
Very specific question from Twitter says, from Josh Invert, how many investors, how many of you are working where there is no capital? How many companies are they working with? Josh, you want to just ask that?
You guys have been talking about how you continue to work with entrepreneurs where there may not be capital on the table. So, like how frequently do you guys do that? Where, you know, you're working with or helping supply resources, make connections versus not investing.
You say they have no capital table, like they don't have any money?
Like, how often do we help without investing? Is that the question? I think, I mean, it probably matters more what other people think about what we do versus what we think we do. You know, we try, right? I mean, I think that the first thing we always try to do if we're not going to invest, I think for me especially, you know, it's Minneapolis entrepreneurs, right? You know, if someone reaches out from Kansas City, business isn't a fit, I'll probably just tell them it's not a fit. But if it's someone within Minneapolis, we try really hard to try to connect them either with other investors or, you know, maybe some other employees or some people who might be customers and stuff like that. Is that what you're getting at in the question? I imagine you do the same stuff.
Yeah, you know, on our end, we always try to make that recommendation for if there is something else or someone else can provide value. You know, I'm also the co-founder of Beta.mn and Twin Cities Startup Week, which are kind of broader events that can help, you know, really showcase companies from the Twin Cities on a much larger scale. And so we have, you know, vast majority of the companies involved in those are not portfolio companies. Those are other just great companies in the community that we want to highlight. So a lot of people present through that, and or we make recommendations beyond that. But yeah, obviously you have your priorities of your portfolio companies and the local, the people that you're obviously invested in. But I think there is something to be said about, you know, the rising the tide on everybody, and it is a small enough community. You're probably 1 or 2 degrees away from someone who can provide you some real value.
I would add to that, you know, I'm a full-time entrepreneur, so I'm a little bit different than the VC guy sitting next to me. So most of the time I'm not going to invest in your company, and most of the time the value that I can provide to you is less about capital and more about making introductions, maybe to people like this, or possibly providing advice, although I'm a little scared about Patrick's quote, so I guess I'll have to let you decide what type of advice my category falls into.
That's a good point. How from you, and they totally berate or shoot you down to tell you why you need them to succeed. I see that happening so much out there. I really do. That the service provider, whomever it is, they need to convince the entrepreneur that they don't have what it takes to do this, therefore they need them. Therefore they need to pay them, or they need to give them equity. And I think to your point of what you're talking about, you could flip that in terms of your approach towards startups and entrepreneurs, and I think really take advantage of the opportunities to have a different philosophy in how you engage with them and approach them.
So I'm curious, do you guys value failure? Like, is it better to go out 5 times, try and fail, versus wait, be conservative, wait for the perfect thing, really have the great idea? Like when you look at a company and it's run by some guy who's like, fail, 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 but this one looks pretty good. Like, because you gain experience from that, right? I mean, we talked about sharing the stories.
I couldn't give a shit at all. I mean, it just doesn't matter, right? I think it's all about what's going on right now. I love funding first-time founders, right? I think it's great. Or people who have failed multiple times. I give no additional credit to someone's done this 3 times, so the 4th time they're going to do it, right? So I think if anyone's dinging someone for failure in a past life, I just think it's kind of bogus. Now, to be fair, I think there's a traction piece of it, right? I mean, if you come back with something, on a piece of paper and you say, hey, here's my next one, it's probably not going to sing as strongly as, here's my next one and I've got these customers paying and, there's something here. So I think there's probably got to be a little bit more meat on the bone, but yeah, I wouldn't ding it at all. You got to be the same way, right?
Question about one of the issues that one of the questions that you had posted on the question description was why are we mediocre? And when I'm looking at that, and I look from cities, and I don't necessarily see you as mediocre. So the question I have is what is your definition of mediocre? Why do you think you're mediocre? And what actually do you want to get? What's the vision you have for this that will make you not mediocre? That's probably the most important thing. What's your vision? You can ask why you're mediocre if you don't have a goal. So I'm sort of kind of look at that and hear your responses to that.
There's a lot in that. Did you more specific, like ask more specifically the question?
The specific question would be, why do you consider yourself mediocre?
Okay, let me answer that. Quantitatively speaking, relative to other markets that are our size and population, we are below average at best mediocre in terms of the amount of startups that we have, the amount of capital that goes into them, exits that we have, the startups that are spun out of technology transfers, the patents that are issued, computer science technical degrees that are created. By basically all measurements, Minnesota, if you just look at it population-wise, the rest of the country, we're in the middle of the pack. There's a definition of mediocre, average at best.
So your goal would be to not be mediocre would be to, increase or decrease depending on what variables we're talking about. More technology and more patents out there, more startups starting.
Absolutely.
I also think there's a piece to it also where it's really easy to look at funding league tables or exits, of other communities and stuff like that. And I would be really surprised if in 3 years we have this conversation and, the word mediocre is still up there. I think one thing that's there is patience, right? I mean, what it takes is every single person says that they want big exits, right? Because we need more Darren Cotters, right? And, forget investors and venture capitalists, right? Like if it doesn't matter where the money comes from. What matters more is where the company is, okay? Because that company is going to breed a lot of other people who can be like Darren and can reinvest, right? I think we have a lot of really promising companies right now. So I think a key thing for this community is patience, right? I think that if everyone looked around, they could name a handful of companies that are doing really, really well. And it's in everyone's best interest that they, shoot high and, don't sell out early and they want to go big. And I think it's also having the patience to actually stick through and know that you've got some promising stuff coming.
I want to follow up with Jeff, though, for a second. As you kind of gave a bleak picture there for a minute, where are we on this road, though? And is this a bumpy gravel road? Is this a paved superhighway? Like, where do you see us on this continuum?
That's up to the entrepreneurs to define.
No, but I'm just saying from like where you're sitting and you're talking to all these folks.
Okay.
How do you see it, though? How's the picture? I mean,
I try to look at it.
Is it partly cloudy, sunny on the horizon, stormy as hell before we get there?
Yeah, it's like a Minnesota day. Really. So keep in mind, we obviously at Tech Dynamite have a vested interest in the prosperity of the technology industry. We're sharing that. If there's no startups and there's no activity, what do we have? We have no stories to tell. We have no content to share. We're out of business as well. But at the same time, it's a balance in that sense, I think, with the reality and painting the clearest of the market, to provide those who are in the market with the best intelligence or the best awareness of what the situation is. I think, you know, mediocre is the best way to describe that, and I don't know that that's positive or negative. I just think we're just in an average place right now. This is one thing visually you can look at. We're going to be sharing more data. One of the things that we realized going into this session as we started to dig out all our data over the last 5 years, there's no way we're going to get it all in for this session. So we are going to be collaborating on the state of tech startups in Minnesota on tech.mn over the coming weeks and months, digging into more of this stuff to answer these questions, Paul. But you know, this is just one example of something that shows us where our funding is. Now, this is the past 4 years, and we'll have another quarter or two to reference when we publish more of this. But I don't know, trotting along. Is it going and growing? It's a lot better than it was in the early days in 2010 and probably previously, from 2006 to 2008 on. This is just one measurement, right, guys? As our point is, we can look into a lot of these metrics a little bit more to draw a better baseline. Companies that have received funding and funding amounts.
In millions.
In Minnesota.
This is Minnesota, and this is someplace else.
Okay, well, you know, it's a good question. So I'll read you some headlines over the last, because the hard part about this, guys and gals, is that this data has not really existed in other markets until just recently. We've been scouring the upper Midwest at the least and looking at this thing. Where can we get this kind of data to compare and contrast? But stuff is coming out. So for example, 2014, Chicago did $1.6 billion in funding and $7 billion in exits. To compare, in Minnesota, we did about $250 million in overall venture funding, or angel funding, or seed capital. So 1/10 almost of Chicago in terms of capital investment, you know, is one point of view. And then if we look at other markets such as Colorado, $758 million in funding. Austin, $993 million in funding. Almost $1 billion in 2014 of capital, risk capital, went into these startups.
How much are those local communities actually enticing people to invest?
I think the entrepreneurs are enticing investors to invest.
That's right.
Is that what it comes down to, guys? Like, is it the community or is it the entrepreneur, the dealer that compels you to move forward?
I think it's a combination of both, and I also think we shouldn't be thinking of that all the capital that is invested in Chicago or Austin is coming from Austin and Chicago. The vast majority of that's coming from out of market, and that when you look at the Boulder market, when it started, when I was out there, it reminded me a lot of where the Twin Cities market is right now. And you could start to see some of the writing on the wall. And the majority of the funding was coming from in-state at the beginning, but eventually that trended the other way, where now the vast majority of the money that's funding startups in that region is coming from out of state. So I think obviously the entrepreneurs and the startups entice people locally to get it started, but then eventually it gets bigger beyond that market, and then that funding comes. Because I know, for example, $1 billion in Austin, there's no funds there that are even remotely close to that you could do that, right? So you're drawing in capital, and you have a narrative going on a national level that is drawing in people to go visit there. People like me, I go to those markets because of I know there's stuff going on there. So success breeds success. I don't think funding is the stalwart of showing success. It's one of the indicators for sure as far as activity, and inactivity, usually breeds some sort of success out of that if you run the averages. So.